Here are my note cards. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay.
By a show of hands, who here has felt like they have lost an argument? Okay, me too. One of the most annoying feelings for me is when I feel like I have not effectively conveyed the ideas that I presented in my argument to the person that's listening. So, I've conducted a lot of research to figure out how to minimize this feeling of losing an argument. So, today, I'm going to talk about the most effective way and how you can increase your chances of winning an argument. Like a story, an argument has a beginning, a middle, and an ending. An intro, a body, and a conclusion. Like any great story, let's start at the beginning with your introduction. The introduction is where you set the stage for your argument, where you introduce your ideas and you bring together the beginning of your argument. What's important to remember is that each person that you're arguing with comes with a different set of beliefs and values that are often different to your own. This can be influenced by their background, their demographic, and their culture. Now, culture is one of the things that I want to talk about a little bit more in depth. Young Tu and Eva Tezer, in their article, Cultural Differences and Similarities in Beliefs, Practices and Neural Mechanisms of Emotional Regulation, talked about how culture can not only influence the beliefs you have, but also how you perceive them and respond to emotional stimuli. Emotion is another thing that I want to talk a little bit more in depth on. So I'm going to draw your attention to the brain. The amygdala, this small almond-shaped piece that sits behind each ear, is one of the strongest emotionally regulating sites that you have in your brain. Timothy Eli, Stephen Hammond, John Hoffman, and Clinton Klitz, author of Ecstasy and Agony, Activation of Human Amygdala in Positive and Negative Emotional Regulation, talked about how the amygdala is often the strongest sense of the negative stimuli and your perception of it. So, when you're introducing your argument, you do not want to appeal to the emotional aspect of the person that you're arguing with. Because when you appeal to these emotions, it often clouds their judgment and inhibits them from understanding what you're saying and incorporating the logical sequence of ideas that you present. Moving away from the introduction, let's talk about the body of your paragraph. The body of your argument, the body of your argument is where you state your points. It's where you introduce, where the actual arguing of your argument occurs. What's important to remember is that you should state your ideas in a logical and clear sense. You're trying to get the person to see your point of view. You're trying to get them to understand where you're coming from and ultimately what you believe. So, to accomplish this in the best way, you should do it in a clear, easy to understand way. Also, you should structure your points in a logical progression. I'm going to draw your attention to the board again. Now, let's look at the frontal lobe. From the academic journal Current Opinion in Neurobiology, Nils Colling, Roger Mass, Matthew Rutsworth, and Jerome Salit, in Evaluation in Decision-Making and Frontal Cortex Specialization to Handle Logic and Decision-Making, talk about how the frontal lobe has specialized in becoming the decision-making and logical progression hub of your brain. As you can see, the frontal lobe takes up a considerable portion of your brain itself. So, we want to appeal to this logical aspect of the person that you're arguing with. And in doing so, you can better convey yourself and more accurately get them to believe and understand the points that you're talking about. Finally, like any good story, you have a good ending. So you should end your argument with a strong conclusion. Your conclusion summarizes the points that you talked about and references the validity of the things that you've argued about or the points that you've used. You should acknowledge that you are only here to state your opinion and not to question theirs. This judgment is a really important aspect of the argument process because when people feel judged, they often resort to defense mechanisms. Phoebe Kramer, author of article Defense Mechanisms, 40 Years of Empirical Research, talks about how there are three main types of defense mechanisms: denial, projection, and identification. Now, these different defense mechanisms often limit the ability of the person you are arguing with to see your side, to see what you are talking about, and to ultimately incorporate the points that you make into their beliefs. They shut down and usually resort to their preconceived ideas and ultimately do not hear anything you have to say. Now, I've talked about the three main things of an argument: your introduction, your body, and your conclusion, and a couple important things to remember about each of them. An emotionally neutral introduction, the logical progression of your ideas in your body, and a non-judgmental conclusion. So, what I hope you guys can take away from this is I hope you can take some of the things that you've learned in this presentation and use them in your next argument. Hope that you can use this so that when you enter into your next argument, you do so confidently and you can come out of it in a way that you feel you have won. Thank you. Thank you. Do you guys have any questions?
What
Yes.
if you still end up losing the argument? Where do you go from there?
So, what do you do if you still end up losing the argument? What you can do is you can either continue that argument or you can pretty much accept defeat. You are entitled to your own beliefs and so is the other person, and the purpose of the argument is to get them to see where you stand, but sometimes that's just unavoidable. These are the best ways that you can get them to see your point of view. Any other questions? Yes, Sebastian.
Do you think if more people were like educated in the subject matter, more arguments could be like thought out before it happened? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, so do I think that if people are more educated in the topics that they're talking about, if they better be able to argue them?
yeah.
So I feel, yes, I feel if you have a better understanding of the things that you're arguing about, you can better put together an argument in a logical and coherent sense and back that up in a better way. Okay. Any other questions? Liv, do you have a question? That's okay. Just to
I
open it
have
up.
a question.
Yes.
Do you think of all of this in your head before you start the argument? Or do you just kind of role play with it?
So
Role play with it.
the best way that I would suggest is to think of it beforehand so you know what you're going to talk about, but then also have the ability to be on your feet and think on your feet so that you can roll with the points that they make up and adapt your argument. Okay. Yes, last
Do you also think that this basic structure for our argument can vary from person to person depending on like what they're like arguing or like the way
Yes.
that they're presenting their points?
I feel like your argument can kind of evolve and change depending on what you're arguing and also your style, and if you know the person, also what you're trying to accomplish with them. So, thank you all for your questions. If you have any more questions, feel free to talk to me later. Thank you guys.